Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Richard Linklater's film, School of Rock. So this is a slacker comedy. It's also a campus comedy. And longtime viewers of the channel may know that I really like campus comedies, campus novels, things like this. As an educator myself, I find them really, really interesting. This one, however, there's a lot of interesting problems. So I actually enjoyed the movie. I'm going to say that right up front. I think it's a fun movie. Boy, howdy, are there problems though. So the basic storyline: you have this character, Dewey Finn, played by Jack Black. He is a kind of slacker, musical. So he is ambitious of being a rock star. He gets kicked out of his band because he's Jack Black, so he's like over the top. He does all the stuff that Jack Black kind of does in his shows, as a member of Tenacious D, for instance. And so he has no money. He has no prospects of stardom. He is about to be kicked out by his roommate, Ned Schneebly, largely at the behest of Ned's girlfriend, who hates Dewey, basically. Ned had been in an earlier rock band with Dewey, but he left and he's become a substitute teacher working toward getting his full teacher's license. Dewey is at home when a school calls. The Horace Green Preparatory School. They want to bring in Ned as a substitute for a long-term gig. They're planning to pay him a relatively decent salary. And so Dewey basically commits fraud and presents himself as Ned Schneebly to come in and teach these kids, in scare quotes, and basically just try and get the paycheck without actually having to do any work. What ends up happening is he sort of overhears the students in music class where they're playing this very sort of classical, traditional, fairly staid music. And Dewey says to himself, I can make these kids into a rock band. And he basically proceeds to do this. He convinces these kids that there is a secret school project called Battle of the Bands. It's going to be very prestigious, and they are going to be competing in it. And so the reason they don't know about it yet is because it doesn't start till the next quarter, but they're going to get a secret jump on it to get an advantage. And so basically the core of the movie really revolves around him teaching these 10-year-olds, 10, 11, whatever it is, to play rock and roll, to appreciate rock music as a genre. He teaches them about the sort of rebellious philosophy of rock and roll, etc., etc. And they basically create this amazing show to enter the Battle of the Bands competition. Dewey manages to get them actually entered, and then things start going south. I mean, this is the basic sort of plot line of a comedy movie where things are sort of humming along, unrealistic events are happening, action is rising, and then a crisis has been reached. In this case, Ned and his girlfriend find out that Dewey has been impersonating Ned to commit fraud at this school. They find this out on Parents' Night. And so these parents who are paying $15,000 a year for their kids to go to this prep school and get this great education, they are all there when the cops show up and are like, hey man, we're going to be arresting you now. That, incidentally, is actually one of the big problems with this, because that storyline kind of just gets dropped. Dewey flees the school. The cops are just like, whatevs, we don't even give a shit that you're fleeing after having committed fraud. We're just going to let you run off with your guitars that you've brought into this classroom. But then the students themselves are like, yeah, well, fuck this. We're going to go play the Battle of the Bands. Let's do that without our parents' permission or anything like that. So they commandeer a school bus, basically. They drive to Dewey's apartment where he's sort of back to being a unemployed loser. And they get him. They go and they play a great rock show at the Battle of the Bands. They don't win, but the crowd starts chanting for their band. And so they go back on and play an encore. Happy ending. Everybody lives happily ever after. Dewey and I think Ned start an after-school program where they teach kids about rock music. So, what are some of the problems here? No, again, I really do like this movie. I find it very enjoyable, but it's also extremely problematic. One is because, as is not uncommon in slacker comedies, the protagonist is extremely manipulative. It's very, very ethically problematic, the way that he treats other people. I don't think Dewey Finn is a sociopath in this, but he's got some sociopathic traits. Like he does things that are good for him or that he perceives would be good for him with no real consideration of how they might impact others. Also, no real concern for things like the law, safety, liability, things like this. So, a couple of examples. One, he manipulates. So, I mean, the big one, obviously, is that he steals his roommate, Ned Schneebly's identity, basically, to go into a school without the proper credentials and to teach these children. He also derails these children's education initially by just not doing anything, basically saying you get recess all day, but then subsequently by molding them as a rock band to enter a Battle of the Bands contest so that he can make money. Realistically, this is not necessarily a good use of their time and energy as students. This is not what the school is supposed to be teaching them. So there's that element of it. He manipulates the principal of the school, played by Joan Cusack. And she is a kind of uptight figure who is initially not okay with the idea of like him taking the kids on a field trip, which he proposes so that he can sort of officially get them to the Battle of the Bands. But he eventually sort of manipulates her by like taking her out for a drink because some of the other teachers had said that at a party or something, she had gotten drunk and done a Stevie Nicks impersonation. So he like takes her out to this bar, and buys her a large beer. He puts Stevie Nicks on. So basically he's manipulating her by pretending or implying or opening the door for the interpretation that he's romantically interested in her. But actually the one instance of manipulation that really kind of made me just like tense up. There is one of the kids, Summer. So Summer is like she's the class factotum. She's basically the teacher's pet. Very, very dedicated to her education, very, very like exacting in her standards, etc., etc. When Dewey is assigning all of the kids roles within the band, Summer gets assigned as a groupie, which in this context actually doesn't mean what typically we think of as groupies. What it seems more to be is like producing merch. So making t-shirts, hats, whatever it is. But Summer is, so Dewey pulls up for work the next day. Summer is leaning against a tree, pissed off look on her face. And she is basically like, I am not going to be a groupie. I researched them on the internet. They sleep with the band. No. And Dewey, this is just kind of a terrible moment, really. Dewey is like, all right, listen, Summer, I didn't want to say this in front of the other kids because I didn't want them to get jealous, but I was going to make you band manager. Like, you're clearly fucking manipulating this child. And again, it is this pattern of manipulation throughout the movie that Dewey Finn is able to get away with. From our perspective as the audience, largely, he is able to get away with this continual manipulation because Jack Black is very funny and charming and quirky. And again, that's one of the things about slacker comedies as sort of a genre, is the protagonists are often they're not necessarily positive figures. Like they often behave in reprehensible ways, but because they are somehow charming and quirky, we're on board with that. The film encourages us to be on board with this manipulation because we're supposed to sort of identify with the character and say, ah, ha, ha, yeah, he's sticking it to the man by teaching these kids to rock, etc., etc. And the film encourages us to look at it that way. But it's actually really problematic behavior. So the other big element here, for me, the other big problem with this film is just the legal issues and the liability issues, right? Because on Parents' Night, when Dewey Finn is revealed as having impersonated Ned Schneebly, the cops show up. There are at least 2 cops in the hallway with the principal, with Ned, with his girlfriend, etc., etc. And then the cops are just like, whatevs. Dewey is just allowed to take 2 of his guitars and just flee the school. This guy has committed fraud. He's committed identity theft. He's taught without a teaching license. Like, these are all things that should be of legal concern. It's not really clear why the cops are just like, yeah, man, you can walk past us with 2 of your guitars and then book it out of this school and we're not going to do anything. Like, the only people who pursue him are the parents. So that doesn't really make any sense. And then that whole problem is just dropped at the end of the movie. Like, legally, if you have committed fraud and like impersonated a teacher in this way, I think it's extraordinarily unlikely that in any state you would then be able to get a license to set up an after-school program where you're working with children whom you have previously committed fraud to work with. Like, just the idea that the whole legal system just sort of forgets about this, and that Horace Greeley Prep doesn't sue him. Because the thing is, again, these parents, like, this is one of the points that's made in the movie, particularly by the principal. These parents are incredibly protective of their children, and they are incredibly wealthy. The idea that they would just be like, yeah, okay, you put on a great rock show, I'm no longer concerned about the fact that my child was not learning the curriculum they were supposed to be learning for whatever this amount of time is, and that you are not a licensed teacher, and you were interacting with my children, and that Horace Green Preparatory School, to which I'm paying $15,000 a year, just allowed you to be in the classroom. None of that would happen. No way. These parents would not be dropping this. It's unlikely that any state would let Dewey Finn set up an after-school program where he's working with kids. It's just, it's one of these sort of problematic things where, like, there are real legal issues created by the plot of the film, but in order for the resolution that the film wants to occur, it has to ignore the reality of those legal problems, even though it gestures to those legal problems. And I think that's kind of a problematic approach. I think there are real issues with sort of pretending that those legal problems are just going to go away.